Hey people, welcome to the channel. Now, because I test running gear pretty much for a living, I am often found wearing at least 2 watches, sometimes more. But in this video, I'm going to explore an idea that I think can help many runners improve their running and their racing. And this is ignoring your watch, ignoring your heart rate monitors, forgetting pace, all those trackers, put them to one side and start to run on feel. So in this video, we're going to ask a couple of questions. What's it like to race a marathon or a half marathon without looking at your watch? Why might you want to do that? What are the big benefits? And if you wanted to run naked, how and when should you do it? I'm also going to be taking you through what I've discovered from my own running on feel experiments, including a half marathon and 2 full marathons where I didn't look at my watch. We'll dive into what I learned, how I found it, and why I think this could be a benefit to you. So can I run my best paced marathon without looking at my watch? Let's find out. So what do we mean by running on feel? Well, essentially what we're talking about here is being able to tune in to your own kind of feelings without any external trackers and devices to tell you kind of pace and heart rates and all those kind of things. And just be able to get a good idea of the intensity that you're running at, how long you can sustain that intensity, and whether or not you're kind of pushing too hard or you've got more wiggle room to go faster. Now you can run on feel at various different intensities. Obviously you can go very slow and very easily. One of the kind of best examples I think of this is when coaches might tell you to run at a conversational pace where you can talk to somebody and kind of manage that effort, and you're running at a pace that means that you can probably run for quite a long time or longer because you're not pushing too fast. You're able to breathe and get words out in a conversation. That's basically a way of managing your own intensity by running just on the way you're feeling. There are obviously other examples of this. If you want to go out and race a half marathon or a full marathon, you're going to sort of find different levels of intensity that you're going to have to run at. And tuning into how you feel with your heart rate, how hard your heart is beating, how much you're breathing, what's going on with your muscles and your legs. All of these things come into kind of the mix when it comes to working out, your overall kind of running on feel. Now in race conditions, what I mean by kind of running on feel is essentially looking at the distance you're going to run and being able to run from sort of mile 1 to the final mile at an intensity which is going to keep you nice and even. You're right on the limit. You're not pushing too hard so that you break yourself and you can't hold that and sustain it for the full duration of the run. You're basically edging along in control, steady, but you're working hard, but you're kind of overall in control at a steady pace that you're going to be able to sustain for the full duration, full distance of that run, be it a half marathon or a full marathon. Now this can be a really fine line. It's not necessarily an easy thing to do, but the aim here is to feel like you're avoiding fighting the pace. You're not putting sort of too much struggle too early on into your race, and you're not forcing it or feeling like you're running on borrowed time. How many times have you set off on a half marathon or a full marathon, realised kind of 2 or 3 miles in that you've gone out too quick, maybe caught up with the crowds and the adrenaline, and then really struggled later on? Well, this is about kind of avoiding that and running in a steady, sensible, controlled manner. Now, in order to kind of manage these effort levels, what we normally do is we'll kind of turn to sort of pacing. And we've done all of our training runs and we know roughly kind of what pace targets we need to hit. And that gives us a kind of framework for how we're going to approach the marathon or the half marathon. We've got might have a pace bracelet on, or we've got an idea in our heads of what our splits need to be for the 5k, for the 10k, for the 15 and so on. Or we might be looking at a heart rate monitor. That's another one. You know roughly sort of the heart rate levels you're at. If you hit a certain heart rate level that you're going to be pushing too hard, or if you kind of start to see those rise quickly, that maybe you're kind of overdoing it rather than you sort of getting a gradual rise. This is it mirrors some of these things, but you do it without having to rely on looking at those for guidance. You're able to do it just by sort of focusing inwardly and asking, how do I feel? Am I pushing too hard? Am I going to be able to sustain this for the duration of this run? Now I can hear a lot of you sort of saying, this is a risk, right? This is a big risk to go out and cover your watch and run a race. You've done 16 weeks of training. You want to get it right. What happens if I go too fast? What if I can't manage my own kind of running on feel? I totally agree. I wouldn't be doing this necessarily in an A race that I've got a lot invested in. But I think there's real value in doing it in maybe even a B race or a race that you haven't really got so much riding on. Just go and have a go, have a feel, cover your watch, go out, run and see what you get. And this can be a really useful experience. Now I've tested this out on a couple of races that I had an inkling that I could run fairly fast, but I didn't really know what I was going to get. I'd done a bunch of training. I wasn't really out there to sort of hit a PB. I just was interested to see what I would get, covered my watches. The first one was the New Forest marathon. Now this is a particularly kind of tricky kind of course to pace because it's a mixture of kind of trails and roads. There's a decent amount of elevation and hills in there. You know, it's off-road, it can be slippy. It can be hot as well sometimes. There's a lot of conditions that come into the New Forest Marathon that make it quite hard to sort of pace it as a marathon. I've done it 4 or 5 times this race, and I have blown up quite a lot in those 4 or 5 times when I've tried to race for a time that I feel like I'm deserve, that my training might allow me, but I'm not really sure. Now this last time I did it in 2022, covered both watches, and I went out and I ran probably the most even-paced marathon I've ever run. I ran entirely on feel. I didn't look at my watch once, and I ran 3:10:47, which is one of my faster end sort of marathons. My fastest is a 2:57, but it was a massive 20-minute, I think, PB on this course. I went through halfway in 1:35, so I ran almost an even split as well. And what really fascinates me about this is the marathon that I've run, I felt the most in control from the start to the finish. Yes, the final 6 miles still hurt, the muscles kind of ached, you know, the usual kind of last 6 miles of a marathon sort of still came into play. But from a cardio point of view and a sort of struggle point of view, I didn't feel like I'd gone too far and I was really having to reach and dig. I felt sort of steady and control from kind of start to finish. I had to work hard in those final miles, but I wasn't doing that thing where sometimes you can feel like you're treading treacle. My second test was at the Royal Parks Half. It's a bit of a twisty turny sort of central London course through the parks. It's got about 100 metres of elevation in it, so you know there are a few kind of hills in there. There are a few sort of those gradual hills that you don't really notice that you're running, which can kind of sometimes scupper kind of best kind of PB attempts. There's also a few downhills that can lure you into kind of running too fast, particularly from the start. There's a big kind of fast start on this one, and I was definitely this time guilty of going out a little bit too fast. Again, didn't look at my watch. I was also on the tail end of a cold, so I think it made it a little bit more difficult for me to tune into my own kind of intensity levels because my chest was a bit sort of locked tight and I wasn't breathing straight. My heart rate was a little bit more all over the place, and that made doing this a little bit more tricky. That said, I still ran 1:27:24, and I think that's around my kind of 3rd or 4th fastest ever half marathon time. I went through the halfway in 43 minutes, did the second half of it in 44 minutes. So again, fairly even running here. And looking at my splits, that wasn't really bad pacing overall. And I did that all without worrying about what my watch was saying. Head up, sensible, steady, controlled, you know, just not too much struggle. Again, you know, same as final 3 miles hurt a little bit, but the whole race was pretty much even and I felt in control of the whole thing. So for my final run on field test then, I'm here at the Abingdon Marathon just outside of Oxford in the UK. It's a wet and grey and rainy day. It's pretty miserable, I have to say, for as marathon starts go. But I'm going to run this one entirely on feel as well and see what I get. Back in 2018 I ran a 3:11 here. I went for a sub 3. I blew up because I paced it badly on the watch. So it's going to be interesting to see. I think I'm around about the same kind of level of fitness. So it's going to be interesting to see if I just run it all on feel, whether or not I can do better over that time. So let's go and have a look. So what are the big benefits that I've learned from those few n=1 experiments that I've done? Well, first up, they've stopped me blowing up quite as much. So how many times have you started a goal race, a half marathon or a marathon, not sure how well your training's gone, you've sort of set a target before you did your training, you've come to the end and you've decided, well, look, we're going to go and have a crack at that, we'll see if we can get away with it on the day, get a pace bracelet on, or you set your kind of pacing times and then you just go out and hope for the best. You hope the wind's going to be behind you and everything's going to go okay. You run out at that kind of target pace to start with, and then somewhere 2/3 into the race, everything falls apart and you end up finishing kind of way outside of your target window and of having had a very kind of uncomfortable day, a bit more of a struggle in the end, not such a pleasant run. I have done that loads of times. This stops that for a start. By running on feel, you basically get the race that your fitness deserves, not the race that you think your fitness deserves. So you run to your capacity, not what you have in your mind should be the goal that you should achieve. Now, number 2 is what that leads to is a much happier race because you run the whole thing feeling in control and measured rather than feeling fast and then feeling slow and struggly. You're in control, and psychologically it's such a boost to be in control in those latter stages of the race where you feel good, you still feel up on your form, you still feel like you've got stuff in the tank to give, and often you end up kind of passing people is what I've found. You're the one who looks like you're running with intent at the end. How you feel and your true capacity dictates the pace rather than some hopeful numbers on your wrist. Now that's not to say that you're not testing yourself, you really are. You're still pushing on the edges of those limits. But what's happening is that you're towards the end, you're running with a positivity rather than a negativity. And I think this is a really big kind of breakthrough for me. It really helps in terms of feeling good for those final miles and feeling in control rather than feeling like I'm now running uphill and it's a big, big battle to get to the finish line, holding on to my pace, that, or maybe holding on with what's left after I've gone too fast early on. Now the third thing is that it can make it much easier to contend with different conditions: terrain, wind, heat, hills, any of those outside external factors that pacing struggles with. This changes that. You're more in control of those. You can respond to those elements. You've got more flexibility. A pacing bracelet doesn't really know what's going on the course. It just says do 8.5 minute miles for 14 miles. This allows you to adjust in real time. When you go up a hill, you need to ease it back. It means you don't break yourself coming off the top of that hill. If it's very, very windy and you're running into a headwind, you ease back. You're not going to fight through that and then burn yourself out too early. What this does is basically help you to avoid pushing too hard at any point during the race. But aren't you stopping yourself from pushing your limits doing this, I hear you ask? Well, not really. I think quite the opposite. What this does is actually help you push to your limit, but do it for longer, and you're going to get more out of it as a result. You basically give yourself the freedom to run right on your limit for the whole race. And when you're closing in on those final miles, be it the last 6 miles of a marathon, the last 3 of a half, whatever, a mile of a 10k, if you feel like you've still got more to give at that point, feel free to go for it. I mean, this is it. You're still running on fill. That's where you're saying, you sense it. You think, well, actually, yeah, I know that my system can cope with these last 6 miles and I can up it a notch. And actually, you're going to take more time out of it, those last 6 miles, and feel positive, passing people, have positive reinforcement than you will having done those first 6 miles fast because you're sticking to a pace on your watch. Now, it's not just for race conditions either. I think running outside of race conditions just on feel is absolutely brilliant as well. I think this is a particularly powerful thing. It's liberating to be free from the sort of the time, the distance, any kind of negativity that might come around that feeling of looking at the watch thinking, am I running too slow today? Or am I going to make the distance that I need to make? How does this run compare to something else that somebody else has done? All of those things go by the wayside because it's covered and you're just moving, and you're moving in a way that your body is just allowing you to your capacity. You're not worrying about whether my heart rate has gone too high too early. You're completely freed from all those numbers to go out and run with your head up and enjoy it. And freed from the numbers, there basically is no failure. So do you still need your watch? Absolutely. Wear your watch. Cover it with a buff, whatever, sticky tape, whatever, sweatband, whatever you want to cover it with, a jacket. Gather the data. It's really important that after the run to go back and have a look and review it. What you want to do here is you're sort of looking for correlations. How did you feel in those first 6 miles? Did you go out too fast? And how does that look for your heart rate when you get back? You can sort of identify bits where you think, oh, okay, that feeling that I had during the run, yes, I know what's happening because I can see my heart rate has sort of drifted up, or I can see my pace was way too sort of quick in those first few miles, or you could see that sort of slow drift of heart rate towards the end and the intensity that's going to happen as you're running along. All of those things, you can go back and you basically identify feelings and you put context behind them, and so next time to go out, you know exactly what to do, and you've got something to kind of compare them to and something to work on. This is how you're going to learn how to run on field better in your training runs, so it's useful when you get to your actual races. So I'm just back at the car after the Abingdon marathon, and I just got my official time, which is 3:01:21 from that race. I'm running entirely on feel, and I mean I've just looked at some of the splits, and or at least my mile splits seem sort of fairly even mile pace, but I'm convinced now that this is the best way to race without looking at a watch. I was in absolute total control for the entirety of that race, and I felt strong. I overtook people all the way. No one overtook me. I had gas in the tank at the end. If anything, I potentially could have pushed maybe just a little bit harder. I mean, I know something that you feel often after every run you go, well, if only. But yeah, I maybe could have had pushed a little bit more, and a glance at the watch maybe with 2 or 3 miles to go might have been the instigation I needed to push and try and make the sub 3, but equally I might have blown up. So yeah, I don't know. I had a wonderful run again, you know, and it just felt good. And that's the main thing out of all of this. So I think for me now, from now on, running on feel rather than running paced and with the watch is the way that I will do it. If you want to try running on feel, how would you do it? Well, it's pretty simple, and I think the best way to do it is just to go out and give it a shot. Unless you're an experienced runner already and you've been using heart rate a long time and you kind of already have an idea of this, it's going to take a certain amount of practice to get used to the feelings and the sensations and knowing what kind of constitutes pushing too hard and, you know, what's not going hard enough, you know, hitting that sweet spot. This all takes a little bit of time to sort of tune in, but the only way to really get into that is to go and do it and start to sort of listen into your body as you're running. So here's what to do. Set yourself a challenge, whether it's a 10k, 5k, half marathon, whatever your distance. Switch off the lap alerts on your watches, cover the watches, set a distance alert if you're going to run to distance, set a time alert if you want to run to a time, so that when you know when to finish, basically. Go out and do it. Just go out and run on feel. And the idea here is that you want to set out at a pace that feels sustainable for the distance that you want to cover or the time that you want to cover. You've got to have an idea in your head about whether or not you're going to be going too fast initially. Go at that. At the minute you feel yourself forcing it, struggling, breathing too heavy, the heart rate goes too high, it all feels a little bit too much, just rein it in a bit, pull yourself back a bit, calm it down a bit, and then keep that even. What's going to happen is it's definitely going to fluctuate. You're not going to go out and run this kind of absolutely bang even intensity or pace or whatever for those kind of first early runs on feel. Even when you've done this a load of times and you go out to race a marathon on it, you're not going to get it exactly right. There are going to be times when you get a little bit excited and you sort of find yourself, oh, I've gone a bit too fast here. And then you could just sort of feel the heart rate, you can feel the breath catching, you can just, you know, check in with yourself every sort of couple of, I don't know, half a mile or whatever, and just ask yourself, how am I feeling? Do I think this is a sustainable pace for the longevity of this run? It's too fast, rein it back down. And you're gonna ride, but overall, if you draw the line, it'll actually eventually sort of come out sort of, I think within, you know, you want to aim for sort of probably within 30 seconds per mile, basically. And, you know, the tighter you can get that, the better. And over time, what you're going to get is to understand what's sustainable and what's not, what's too fast, what's too hard, you know, what's too much juice up the hill, you know, what's too much juice down the hill, what happens if you haven't had great sleep last night. All of those things are going to start to be part of your own sort of internal kind of monologue and your knowledge. And number 2 is that you want to finish feeling like you've worked really hard. So there you have it. That's my little guide to running on feel. I hope it's been useful. It's been a great experiment. I've really enjoyed doing it. I think it's been sort of really liberating for me. I don't do it all the time, but I have enjoyed doing it on some races. And it's been a real eye-opener. I don't know, it's just changed the way that I feel about my runs. And I'm definitely going to do more of it. Let me know in the comments below if you have any questions about this. I'd love to hear if you go out and try it. See what you do. If you run faster times or you manage to go further or whatever, if you hate it, hit me up in the comments below. Come back and tell me how you get on. I'd love to hear more. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this coming up on the channel soon. I hope you've enjoyed the video. It's been a pleasure to talk to you, and I'll see you again soon.